Hi there and welcome to Inside the Studio. I'm Evan Sanford. Thanks so much for tuning in today. We've got a great program for you. My very special guest today is Ben Shapiro. Ben is a New York Times best-selling author, as well as the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire. He has been described as a warrior for conservatism. Ben Shapiro, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, we've got a lot to get to, but before we get started, what do you think is the role of government in the United States today?
Well, I think that, what is it or what should it be? What it is extraordinarily large. What it should be is extraordinarily small.
What do you think it should be?
I think the government has prescribed functions as laid out by the Constitution of the United States. It's far overstepped those boundaries into the area of redistributing wealth and attempting to rectify cosmic injustices. And in doing so, it's actually perpetrated more injustice and created more suffering. So I would like to see government minimized as far as possible in keeping with the protection of individuals in the United States from externalities caused by other individuals.
In an article in the National Review, you wrote, "I've experienced more pure, unadulterated anti-Semitism since coming out against Trump's candidacy than at any other time in my political career." Why are you opposed to his presidency?
Well, I was opposed to his presidency during the primaries and during the general. I was opposed to the presidency of both of them during the general, and I sort of hoped that they would both, be set adrift in the Atlantic Ocean with enough food to last them 4 years beyond the election cycle, and we could all go on to elect somebody decent. But that obviously didn't happen. Now Trump is the president. Hillary would have been the president. It wouldn't have mattered to me in the sense that it matters to me in the sense that I think that Trump's policies will be better than Hillary's. I think he does have carry a severe danger of destroying the conservative movement from the inside, which I think is something that is well afoot. But what my role is now is to call balls and strikes as I see them. So that means that if Trump does something good, I'll praise him, and if he does something bad, then I won't. And I kept that standard, by the way, during the primaries and during the general. When he did good things, I would praise him. When he did something bad, then I wouldn't. He didn't earn my vote, so he didn't get my vote. But now he's the president, so my vote is irrelevant, and that means that the facts on the ground are that he's president, and I will analyze him from a conservative point of view throughout. So you can take it that I will always tell you the truth from the conservative point of view.
What are some of the good things that he's done so far?
I think that his executive order trying to restrict regulations, he was saying that he was going to, for every new regulation created, get rid of 2 of them. Obviously, the biggest win was the attempt to appoint Judge Gorsuch. Hopefully, he'll be confirmed. He has promulgated some executive orders on the environment. The EPA today announced, for example, that they're going to start reconsidering emissions regulations on cars. That's a good thing. He's done a series of pretty good things, actually. His talk about cutting a lot of funding to the United Nations, I think, is worthwhile. And then he's done some bad things also. I think Trump Care looks pretty bad. I think that his executive orders on immigration and refugees were poorly implemented in the first instance and poorly drawn up in the first instance, overbroad and over narrow in the second instance as well. So he's a mixed bag. He's a mixed bag, and every week I give him a grade, so it really depends. And the thing about Trump is that you can never give him... The way that I've assessed Trump is basically, if you think of Trump, and you think of any politician like a work of art, and they're a pointillistic work of art. It's like looking at a Seurat painting. If you're right up on top of it, it's a bunch of dots that are right in front of you, and you can't really tell whether you're looking at something that is going to be a beautiful painting or my baby's vomit. And right now that's where we are in time, and if we move out 4 years, then we'll be able to look at it and see, okay, was this something that actually had a design that came out looking great, or was this just a bunch of random noise with an occasional good thing and a lot of bad things, or vice versa?
According to CNN, in the month of President Trump's inauguration, 48 Jewish community centers reported bomb threats. Do you think that this president has a responsibility to take some specific actions that would make it clear that anti-Semitism, per his statements, will not be tolerated in this country?
Well, I think that every president has the responsibility to speak out as often as possible against discrimination, anti-Semitism, racism, and all of that. To attribute what's happening to the JCCs to Trump, I think there's no evidence to do that at this point. And I'm speaking as the #1 recipient of anti-Semitism in the journalistic sphere in 2016. So, I don't think that, I don't think it's fair to attribute to Trump what's going on with the JCCs until we actually see that somebody associated with Trump is doing it. But I don't think that's what's happening here. And so, as always, I'll wait for more evidence. That said, obviously the federal government, should be speaking out against it. Do they have a real role in policing it? It seems to me that's more of a local role. It seems to me that states and localities should be doing the policing job for the most part.
But there doesn't necessarily need to be evidence that someone who would perpetrate a threat would be linked to President Trump. It's just when President Trump in a press conference says, "I'm the least anti-Semitic person that you'll ever find," shouldn't he back that up with
Yeah, I mean,
some,
I find
with some
him
things?
lacking. Sure, I find him lacking in his response.
And then cut the Jewish reporter off in the room asking him.
Yeah, I
about
criticized
the
him pretty strenuously for that.
I
I thought that it was bad stuff, and I would like to see him continue to speak out forcefully on this. Again, it's not my cup of tea. I think that he needs to do better than that. I hope that he will do better than that. I think that, in all fairness, I should mention here that President Obama's record on the Jewish state was particularly abysmal, and there was a good amount of anti-Semitism that didn't just amount to tweets that was promulgated in the world thanks to the international left, as pushed by people including President Obama. So that's not moral equivalence. That's to say there is bad and there is bad, and bad should stop.
In the news recently was Steve King's tweet, which said, quote, we can't restore our civilization with somebody else's babies, unquote.
Mm-hmm.
And in response, Iowa GOP Chief Jeff Kaufman condemned that tweet, saying we are, quote, a nation of immigrants and diversity is the strength of any nation. How do you feel about that tweet?
Well, I mean, I don't think that when you say that diversity is the strength of any nation, it depends what kind of diversity you're talking about.
I didn't say it.
When he says diversity, then it's sort of
from his own party. It's not that it's
it's not about you. Okay, so about with that regard to that particular tweet, there are two ways to read that tweet. One is the obvious way to read it, which is this is pure racism, right? You're basically saying that babies from other countries can't become good Americans or good Westerners because they're from other countries. That obviously would be racism. The second way to read that is that if you bring a bunch of people in from cultures that have nothing to do with Western civilization, and then you don't have any sort of assimilation mechanism, and you have this multicultural ideal, then you're going to end up with enclaves of foreign cultures inside Western civilization, and that's incredibly destructive to Western civilization. That iteration is something that Angela Merkel has said, that's something David Cameron has said, that's actually well within the mainstream of political thought. So the question is, what exactly did King mean by that? When he did his interview with Chris Cuomo on CNN, it was pretty clear. He kept saying over and over, I mean culture, not race. So it was pretty clear that he meant the second. Then, of course, he came out the next day and said something actually racist, right? The next day he came out and he said in an interview that the white population in the United States would not be surpassed by blacks and Hispanics because the blacks and Hispanics would kill each other, which is like, first of all, factually untrue. Second of all, why would that be a good thing? I try, like I say, I try to call them like I see them. When he says something that's racist, I will say that it's racist. When he says something that I think was deliberately misconstrued by the media, I'll point that out too. Like, for example, in that CNN interview with Cuomo, there was one line where he said at one point that he wanted the United States to look more homogenous, right? They cut out the first half where he said, I want there to be 3 or 4 generations of intermarriage between all the races, and then hopefully we'll look more homogenous. Well, that changes the entire meaning of the statement. If you just say the first part, it sounds like I just want white homogeneity inside the United States. If you say the second part, then it sounds like I would like for everyone to crossbreed and intermarry whom they please, and then you end up with basically a population of people who are mixed race, which, that sounds like sort of the opposite of white supremacy to me. White supremacists generally are not in favor of interracial sex and marriage. So,
for those that don't know, what is liberal bullying?
Okay, so leftist bullying, and I separate liberal from leftist. So liberal is not the same thing. Liberal are people who typically are broad-minded, want to hear opposing points of view. Leftist bullying is this tactic that's used by the left where instead of making an actual argument or a counter-argument, they'll just say you're a racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe without any evidence that you're actually a racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe. They just call you that in order to shut down the debate because the worst thing you can call somebody in the United States is a bigot, is a racist. And once they say that, there's no real conversation to be had. Once you call somebody a racist, you can't have a conversation with them. You're, as the left likes to say, othering them. So once you other them, then it's very difficult to have a normal discussion with them.
Do you think there's such a thing as conservative bullying?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's bullying by conservatives, by people on the right. There's always browbeating. I mean, but I think that it's not as wedded to this ideology of you're a racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe. That's particular to the left. Right-wing bullying, I guess you could say that there are people on the right who have said that you're unpatriotic if you express certain opinions. That seems like more of a right-wing thing to do. But conservatism is predicated on I don't think of that as particularly conservative. Conservatism is predicated on the idea that you should actually have discussion of issues and that logic should be brought to bear, not just name-calling in pursuit of a political goal.
Next, where do you think there are some places that both sides of the aisle can come to an agreement on?
See, right now I think is actually a really good time for both sides of the aisle to come to an agreement. I think the left hates Trump, despises Trump, and thinks the Republicans are awful. So, I have a recommendation for the left. You won't have to care about Trump, and you won't have to care about the Republicans if you minimize the size of government, and then they're relevant to your life. So how about we all just become libertarians? How about that? How about we all just meet in the center, which is really not the center, but let's all meet on my side of the aisle, where I say that I won't have to care about Obama, I won't have to care about Hillary, you won't have to care about Trump, you won't have to care about the Republicans. We can all just go about our daily lives without having to worry about these politicians.
Are there any specific policies or anything that both sides can agree on, whether it's health care, or are there any topics of conversation?
Well, I think one area where there will be crossover. For example, the obvious one is pot legalization. I think there will be some crossover between right and left on that one, because the right, for libertarian reasons, doesn't want pot regulated, and the left, because they like pot, doesn't want pot regulated. So I think there could be some crossover in that area. There should be crossover in areas that I'm shocked there isn't. Like school vouchers seems like a pretty easy one, and some people on the left have embraced school vouchers before deciding they're against school vouchers. But everything is very polarized right now, and the left in the United States has decided that the government basically is there to guarantee you all sorts of nice things in life, and the right does not feel that way. And so there are real significant political differences in the country that I don't think can be bridged with just a few happy words.
All right, well, we'll hope to tackle them in the next section. We'll be right back with more Inside the Studio right after this. Welcome back to Inside the Studio. I'm Evan Sanford. I'm here with Ben Shapiro, who spoke recently at the University of Redlands. Why do you think that there is so much hostility towards conservative speakers on college campuses?
Because I don't think both sides are really that interested in advancing free speech.
Really?
So I'll argue with the premise of the question.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think that, I think that the right, some people on the right, many people on the right, are committed to advancing free speech, but there are a lot of people on the left who have decided that because free speech can hurt feelings, and they feel that words are equivalent to action, that you have to shut down those words if they hurt people's feelings, they make people feel bad, they're equivalent to violence, they're microaggressing people, they're destroying their safe spaces, and so it's important to quash speech, because you mean a microaggression with a macroaggression. That's a really negative ideology, and it's one reason, as I said before, I separate liberals from people on the left. There are people who are liberal who say, okay, let's have a conversation, we can disagree, but great, let's have that conversation. And then there are people on the left who actually believe that words are violence, and that if you disagree with me, that is an action that must be stopped in a significant way, and that means not just shutting people up by shouting at them, but sometimes it actually comes to blows.
Well, do you think that universities should create speech codes that would limit what people would call the hateful speech that they say is aimed at marginalized students?
No, I don't think there should be speech codes whatsoever. I think that social stigma does a fair bit of this on its own. I think that if you run around a college campus shouting the F word at gay people, then pretty much everyone rightly will not invite you to parties, think you're a jerk, and you'll pretty quickly drop out. So the idea that, social stigma, private stigma, that can be a very effective tool, but the idea that schools generally, particularly state-sponsored schools, which is an even different thing, the idea that state-sponsored schools should be involved in any sort of shutdown of viewpoint, it's viewpoint discrimination under the First Amendment. It's a little bit different on private campuses. It's not something I'm for, because I don't think that any administrator should have the power to say certain viewpoints are allowed and certain viewpoints aren't. But, there are schools with particular missions, and I understand that, and I think that you can talk about what's appropriate and what's not. The problem is, you see that pretty quickly these codes start getting extended to things that are well within the mainstream of political discourse, but administrators find unpleasant and unpalatable. So you'll see speech codes that say things like, if you misgender somebody, then we'll punish you. And it's like, well, no, there's a legitimate discussion in the country right now about whether it is indeed misgendering somebody to call them by their biological sex. Is that misgendering somebody, or is that just speaking because that is a biological scientific fact? That's a conversation that needs to be had, particularly on a place like a college campus. But if the idea is that we have to protect everybody who's marginalized, then that gives it gives the heckler's veto to people as soon as they claim victimhood, and I think that's a pretty negative thing. Doesn't prepare students for the real world either.
Now, there's a viral video of you on another campus talking about transgender men and women, and here's a moment from that video.
The idea that sex or gender are malleable is not true, okay? And I'm not denying your humanity if you're a transgender person. I am saying that you are not the sex to which you claim to be. You're still a human being, and you're a human being with an issue that I wish you Godspeed in dealing with in whatever way you see fit. But if you are going to dictate to me that I'm supposed to pretend that men are women and women are men, no. My answer is no. I'm not going to modify basic biology because it threatens your subjective sense of what you are.
All right, now can you elaborate more on what you meant by that?
I mean, it was pretty eloquent. I think it spoke for itself. The idea here is that the transgender movement suggests that that I am imposing on members of the transgender community by speaking about biological sex. Well, people are imposing on me if they decide that the social standard is supposed to change. Now your subjective sense of yourself is supposed to rule how the entire society deals with sex. The sexual differentiation is a very important part of societal discourse. It's a very important thing when it comes to law. It's a very important thing when it comes to medicine. Pretending that that doesn't exist in favor of some academic nonsense theory about gender over being a social construct or entirely a social construct, that's not only a non-productive conversation, it shuts down what is a very productive conversation. What are the legitimate differences between the sexes? Are they a reflection of biology or are they a reflection of culture? And pretending that men can turn into women or that gender is entirely a social construct is just anti-scientific. And I'm not going to stand up in favor of anti-science just because it, again, makes somebody feel better about who they are on the inside. You can be whoever you are on the inside, be who you are, but we live in a country where I can say things and you don't have to like them, but whatever, as long as I'm not punching you in the face, that's fine. You can disregard everything I'm saying. You can not care what I'm saying. That's the beautiful thing about America. I can say whatever I want and you can decide that you don't care what I have to say. That's wonderful. The problem begins when you suggest that some sort of enforcement mechanism should come in and force me to now believe the things you want me to believe, or say things that are blatantly anti-science because it would make you feel better. Like, I would prefer to be Bill Gates' child. I'd be much richer today, but I can't actually force everyone in the society to call me Bill Gates' child. And again, that's not quite a fair analogy, obviously, because people legitimately believe that they are members of the opposite sex, or the opposite gender, presumably. But the statement still holds. Okay, if you are an XY male, then you are not a female. You may feel like a female, but you're not. And I'm not going to change fact because it makes you feel bad.
What would you say to critics that would say people are not choosing to be transgender, they're born that way?
So I'm assuming that you're not choosing to feel the way that you feel. I've never said that you're choosing to feel the way that you feel. And so I again, disagree with the premise that I'm suggesting that people are quote-unquote making it up or that they're pretending to be one way or the other. No, I think that people feel what they feel, and you have every right to feel what you feel. I have every right to say what I say. So, that's it. Welcome to America, where we're all free.
Speaking of science, do you believe in climate change?
So it's not a question of believing like God, right? I mean, it's either happening or it's not. So my understanding of climate change is that there is climate change taking place. Some part of that is due to the greenhouse gas effect. It is wildly unclear what level of the climate change is due to the greenhouse gas effect or how far out we can map that with any sort of specificity, because there's high levels of scientific debate. The first part of that is the part that the left wants to grab onto and say, well, everyone believes there's climate change. Okay, well, I believe the climate's changing also, but that doesn't answer the real root question, which is how much of this is caused by greenhouse gases. What is the sensitivity, is the scientific term that they use. What's the sensitivity of the climate to greenhouse gases? How much is the climate going to change? How much would we have to cut back on emissions forcibly in order to prevent certain effects? That's a much more complex discussion. When people suggest that we're going to go back to 1860s standards of living in order to prevent New York from being underwater and the Statue of Liberty from barely being able to raise her torch above the waterline, that's a bunch of crap. Like, that's a wild exaggeration. Al Gore's movie is largely fictionalized, and you can agree that we ought to cut down on emissions through market mechanisms, or you can agree that maybe we're overstating the case without having to go too far to one extreme or the other by saying climate change just doesn't happen, it's a complete myth, or that climate change is entirely attributable to human behavior, and we know with great specificity exactly how hot things are going to be.
But I think we can both agree on the fact that it's not a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese, right?
Yeah, it is not a
As
hoax.
the president had once said.
It is not a hoax. But I will say that the idea that we're going to have a world body that forces the United States into deindustrialization, that is something that the international left is largely in favor of, but I'm not sure that it's quote-unquote hoax perpetrated by the Chinese.
What do you think is the future of the Republican health care plan and conservatism in this country?
So I've given up on trying to predict events after 2016 because that was horrifying. But it's, I mean, between the Cubs winning, I'm a White Sox fan, and the election cycle in which the two worst people in America ran against each other and one of them had to lose, I'm not going to say with any level of confidence what's going to happen with the health care bill. I can say that I don't like the health care bill. I think there are a huge number of problems with the health care bill. The idea that you're going to be able to really cut costs, that any of these cut costs are going to be maintained when Congress starts to get political pressure. I just don't believe that's the case. And I think that it keeps in place the root and branch of Obamacare, which is disastrous to me. So, I would hope that it goes down in flames. I would hope that they repeal it, and then I would like them to come back at repeal Obamacare and then come back with a piecemeal approach. Let's make this correction and this correction to have a bunch of 4 or 5 page bills that everybody can understand, as opposed to these giant reorganizations of the healthcare system that invariably fail. That seems to me a better solution. As far as the future of the conservative movement, there is a real gap in the conservative movement right now in a bunch of ways. The question is whether Trumpism is an actual philosophy or whether it's just that people like Trump right now because Trump is the president and Trump won. And if Trumpism is a philosophy, then it is a grand shift away from the traditional conservatism that basically stands for hawkish foreign policy, small government, at home, and social conservatism in the social realm. Right? Trump is not a small government guy at home. He is not a social conservative in any real way. He sort of is a little bit on abortion, but I wouldn't say he's a severe conservative, as Mitt Romney would put it, on abortion. And when it comes to foreign policy, you have no idea where he is. He's sort of a Rand Paul, Pat Buchanan isolationist type, but wants to strengthen the military. So that is a shift away from the Republican Party of the past. You see that in issues like free trade. So how is that all going to shake out? A lot of that depends on Trump's performance. If Trump ends up being a very successful president, he may be able to realign all of American politics about himself. If he ends up being a relatively unsuccessful president, then I think that the parties could snap back to sort of the old lines, because Trump is obviously attempting to cross some of those lines, right? He's trying to draw Bernie Sanders voters on things like trade and infrastructure spending, and that is a real debate. I'm old enough to remember when we didn't like when Obama did it, so that could very well break down for Trump if he does not end up being able to actually successfully pursue his presidency.
Well, thank you very much for being here. This was a real pleasure.
Hey, thanks a
I
lot.
hope you can come back soon. That's all the time we have for the show today. My thanks again to Ben Shapiro for being on the program, and thank you as well for tuning in. Until next time, I'm Evan Sanford, and this is Inside the Studio. We'll see you soon.